Hi, I'm Shanna Wenslick, and this project is a critical analysis for the MSA 698 degree, and I did mine on the efficiencies of creating a centralized graduate student support office for CSE at CMU. The organization's background: CMU is a public university, is located in Mount Pleasant, Michigan. College of Science and Engineering, or CSE, at CMU consists of 8 departments, and within each of those 8 departments, they each have staff that are responsible for graduate student support. Interdisciplinary programs do have specialized staff for support for graduate programs, though. That's the only exception right now. The strategic plan for CSE includes being a first-choice university for students wanting careers in STEM programs, which is science, technology, engineering, and math. They want to foster more scholarly activity and research. Research is especially important in STEM programs. They also want to strengthen Michigan partnerships and beyond the state level. Next, we're going to explore the need for a centralized office. So why do we need this? Why is it important for CSE to have this? Well, number one, graduate student enrollment is down. That's a major one for all higher education institutions in the U.S. right now. Inefficiencies exist within each department with the decentralization that they have right now. And a lot of the staff lack skills, the engagement level, and creativity in graduate student support. Some common goals are not set across departments either. This also leads to the next one, which is a clear vision is not seen by staff. They're kind of just doing their own thing when it comes to graduate student support right now. The focus is not student-centered across departments, which is a major one because that's part of CMU's strategic plan along with CSE's strategic plan. Communication errors exist. Answers are not consistent and received in a timely fashion. And this is not just for staff that help graduate students, this is also for graduate students. Increased research publications for graduate students and faculty mentors. That's one I mentioned before, that's a part of CSE's strategic plan. The consequences of remaining decentralized could be a decrease in funds because enrollment will continue to decrease, an increase in errors, an increase in unethical behavior because staff do not have, shared common goals and missions. They're just kind of reacting and doing what they think is appropriate, which is not always the case and harmful to organizations. A decrease in communication within CSE and a decrease in communication with graduate students. Decrease in creativity for staff to come up with better ways to support graduate students. CMU may become not competitive in STEM graduate programs. A lower prioritization for graduate students, which could be one reason that their degree progress is taking so long to finish, or some students don't finish at all. Less research for graduate students and faculty mentors. A decrease in alumni support, which is a major one for public universities, because alumni support is one way that public universities are funded. And also it could lead to a decrease in external funding that faculty receive. So next we're going to discuss MSA 601 course and the theories applied and what the literature says and conclusions and recommendations. MSA 601 is concerned with organizational behavior. So what concerns exist with changing the organizational culture of graduate student support as it exists right now? We need to look at the employees' behaviors and attitudes. Changes model is great, and it discusses communication, help, assessment, new roles, guidelines, education, and support. It also looked at the leadership role during organizational changes. That's very important, the way leaders communicate change and request feedback. Transformational leadership is great. It helps to motivate employees, and employees will be able to want this change as well and see the need for it. I also looked at Adams' equity theory of motivation. Literature said that communication is basically vital to any organizational changes. It lowers conflict. It lessens, questions that staff have. Leadership style plays an important role, which I already stated. Employees become disengaged when they're not compensated fairly either. So that's a major motivational factor. Transformational leadership is great, and it inspires followers to in turn become leaders themselves. So I would recommend a centralized office would improve this organizational culture. CSE needs to provide a clear chain of command to employees. And CSE should use transformational leadership style to create leaders to in turn go on and motivate people and be able to effectively assist graduate students. And also employees should be fairly compensated if they're doing other jobs and they're taking on more, because that's really going to affect their motivation. So next we look at strategic planning, which is concerned with the MSA 603 course. So I looked at what strategies would give CSE a competitive advantage over other universities by implementing a centralized graduate student support office. Leaders need to be able to use relevant strategies when planning projects so they can stay at advantage against in the market, which the market here is higher education universities. The theories applied is number one, SWOT analysis. I'm sure everyone's familiar with what that is. It's looking at strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats that exist when considering a new project. SWOT analysis is helpful because it can help gain a competitive advantage in the market. It deters, ethical dilemmas that exist, and also strategic leadership is very important in strategic planning. And we need ethical leaders. We need people that are going to, in turn, instill those ethics and behavior to avoid any kind of harmful actions that occur, because lawsuits can happen. In some organizations, unethical behavior leads to death. So next we took a look at what the literature says. And literature reviewed stated that strategic commitments are necessary for long-term gains in the market. The SWOT analysis is helpful in higher education because it's useful so senior management can look at the strategic positioning with competitors. Gaining the competitive advantage is number one when you want to gain a profit share in the market. If enrollment's down, then what can we do to assist in gaining that competitive advantage, getting our enrollment up? Branding is a great way to gain a competitive advantage, especially with all the social media now. It's basically word of mouth. People posting great things about CMU can help get the word out to their friends. Anyone that's on their Twitter or Facebook or Instagram posting positive things about CMU can really help build, a competitive advantage. People will want to come here. And a major one that I'm going to keep discussing is ethical dilemmas, ethics, because leaders need to be ethical. It's very harmful for organizations when people behave in unethical ways. So my conclusions and recommendations go right in line with what the literature says. If your strengths and your strengths and opportunities outweigh those weaknesses and threats, that's one way for leaders to actually see, okay, maybe we can gain a competitive advantage then. And strategic leaders can motivate, and they do bring about change. So that's why it's important for CSE to take the right steps when implementing, if they choose to do so, having the centralized graduate student office. Leaders should enforce ethical behavior through clear, consistent policies across the board. Staff cannot simply take it upon themselves to make their own decisions. Centralization allows for a chain of command to come directly from CSE senior leaders. Therefore, the staff that are going to be directly under CSE, they are not going to take on and do their own things. They're going to ask their leaders, what should I do in this situation? Or where should I go with this student? You really need to know that. You need to be able to make decisions, but ethical ones. And branding is a great way to increase enrollment, as I stated before. especially for graduate students using social media. CSE can create a social media outlet for all graduate students, so they have that way to, in turn, then tell people more about CMU and about the program and the research they're doing. Next, we take a look at diversity, inclusiveness in multicultural organizations, which is in the area of the MSA 604 concentration, MSA 604 course. So I looked at what cultural advantages exist for CSE in having a centralized office. Globalization continues to be on the rise, and CMU strives to be a student-centered, inclusive, diverse environment. So the theories applied were obviously diversity management, cultural intelligence, inclusiveness, globalization, leadership, especially in multicultural organizations, and ethical obligations again. And the personal investment theory basically talks about, these three things: having a sense of self, perceived goals, and facilitating through conditions. Stereotyping and unethical behavior is harmful. Literature states this. It can be horrible for organizations, and that can ultimately decrease enrollment. It could bring on lawsuits, as stated before. Leaders using diversity consciousness are effective, and globalization continues to grow with new technology and social media outlets. Currently, culturally intelligent employees are very beneficial to organizations, and they have the ability to increase inclusiveness across the board, wherever they're at. Just having that intelligence, being able to know how to react in certain situations is very beneficial. Also, CMU, it has many, many different cultures, many different values, and everyone's cultural norms and values need to be protected. One's level of personal investment is also related to motivation. So in conclusions and recommendations, I would require staff in a central office to attend any workshops and trainings available at CMU and even outside CMU, especially in the areas of diversity and diversity management and cultural intelligence. These are very important to have. And creating a social media outlet specific to CSE could increase inclusiveness for the graduate students, because they're not limited to just their own department. They can reach out to more students even outside of CSE, but this at least gives them a start. And leaders should definitely enforce ethical practices, and they have to protect cultural norms and values. A lot of horrible things can happen for students, faculty, staff. It's really, leaders must enforce protection of these. It's laws, but it's more than that. And by offering a question and answer session for feedback is great. It's related to any cultural issues and to increase awareness. So leaders in turn can instill these in the staff that's going to work in the centralized office, and then the staff can come up with maybe these question and answer sessions with graduate students and see this is another way to increase inclusiveness, so they feel they're being heard. And CSE ultimately should hold employees accountable for unethical behavior, and this could be a section added to your annual performance reviews. So then we take a look at the financial side of things, which I'm sure senior management in any project is very interested in saving money, which is the MSA 602 course. So we took a look at what financial benefits could come from having a centralized graduate student service department. And senior management definitely wants to make sure a project is cost efficient before even considering implementation. So behavioral finance is basically leaders must be aware of the market when considering new projects. Leaders must be aware of the potential behaviors in turn of those invested in these projects. It's reading their behavior. Investment costs and fixed assets are important looking at a return on the investment. Public funding is a major source for higher education institutions such as CMU. The contribution of international students is very important. And also a leadership role in budget management is important as well. A project is beneficial if the investment costs are low and the return on investment is high. Public funding is a major source, as stated, for universities, so this needs to be taken into consideration as well as having international students bring in revenue to higher education. That's something that was surprising to me, but it's great to work on that, and leaders need to be aware of all these ways of funding when, implementing a new project. They don't want it to be harmful to what is already occurring. The conclusions and recommendations: the investment costs are low for this project. The overhead costs wouldn't take much. We already have available space in Brooks Hall since the new biosciences building. There's biology moved over there, yada yada, and there's just a lot of rooms open over there where we could make an office, and that we could just get furniture or whatnot. The cost would be very low. You don't have to set up and build a new office. And also, CSE could benefit from using staff already working in the college for the graduate student services. Excuse me. This would save on hiring outside CMU and having to save on training time as well. A centralized office could increase public funding through alumni support as well. If you're increasing the efficiencies of how programs work, then the students after they graduate will be more apt to kind of want to give back, And overall, it would increase support for all students from the admissions time until graduation, which could save on degree progress and increase enrollment in turn. So, how do all these relate to each other? That's the critical analysis part of this. How do each one of these classes and what did we review, how do they all tie in together? Well, all four parts tied in together support creating a centralized graduate student service office. The leadership is highly important in all four areas. Having that chain of command directly from CSE that could promote employees to share a common vision, become more engaged, become more creative, and set forth the goals that upper management puts in place. Employee behaviors vary so much now that the processes are not consistent, which allows for errors and unethical behavior, which is very harmful to organizations. CSE talks about, in their strategic plan to create an inclusive, diverse, student-centered atmosphere, and that's what CMU wants as well. This could greatly increase all of that inclusiveness, all of that diversity management, and the focus will be more on the graduate students. Leaders should strive to improve the current organizational culture through team leadership and transformational leadership. So in turn, employees will take on those leadership roles with graduate students. Strategic leaders look for the most cost-efficient, ethical, motivational ways to create these changes in organizations, and this is an opportunity to do that. The SWOT analysis was very helpful, and it showed that basically the threats and the weaknesses were minimal compared to what you can gain out of this project. And it also showed that we can gain a competitive advantage in the market by having a centralized office in graduate student services. Branding is very important with students and is a useful tool in marketing. Revenue from each area can be generated from increasing enrollment, decreasing errors and unethical behavior, increasing diversity across departments, and increasing inclusiveness among students. And branding is a great way in using a social media outlet for CSE graduate students could help with all of these areas of inclusiveness and diversity management. and becoming more student-centered. Student-centered. On a personal side, I would like to say that I was very surprised at some of the things I found out from this research. I love the idea of using branding as a social media outlet in a way to gain a competitive advantage, especially with globalization on the rise. And STEM programs are increasing, and they draw a lot of international students in. So having this social media outlet, and for them to even, see research stories on this social media page and relay that back to their family in other countries and cultures. It was informative to find research where public higher education institutions get funding and the different ways to increase enrollment, because I was not aware of that before. I do feel employees in other departments lack engagement with graduate students, and they don't view them as a priority, especially if they only have a few graduate students and they have other work to do. Yes, I am biased because I work in biology and I am the graduate program administrator. So I definitely am biased because my sole job responsibilities all have to do with graduate student support. But not every department is like that. It's also beneficial for employees directly involved with graduate students to know the proper outlets across campus, where to reach out to when situations occur, and that's not always happening. Some staff might just want to pass the buck on to someone else to take care of it instead of actually dealing with an issue that's, graduate students have. Decentralized support becomes more confusing for students, especially in interdisciplinary programs. They might be, as far as we have some in our biochem, cell and molecular students that work with CMed faculty or work with chemistry faculty, but since the program is housed in biology, so they oftentimes come to me, but then they are confused. Do they need to reach out to the chemistry program instead? It just gets really confusing for students. And as I stated before, the overhead costs are low. CSE will probably have some pushback from faculty who view this change as harmful because they don't want the control to be taken away from them. And some staff may push back too, or feel like they're not doing their jobs. So it's really important for leadership to step in and be open and communicate the change is for good. It's for the students. It's for enrollment. It's for to be in line with the strategic plan set forth by CMU and by CSE. Looking back, I wish I had known my project before the semester started and maybe work with an advisor on campus, because I think this project would have been great if I could have done primary research, so I could have used surveys and interviews across the departments in CSE to actually dig in more deeper to the organization. Next, I definitely would not have waited close to 7 years to finish this degree, because it was especially difficult for me to remember the MSA 603, 604, and 601 course objectives. And I rented the book, so I didn't have the books available. And I took those classes so early on, it was just really hard, to go back and try to remember everything and put it into this one project. All in all, I think it was a great experience. I learned a lot about how the 4 areas are all related to one another, especially in project management and especially in my leadership concentration. So in conclusion, I wanted to thank Drs. Dave Patton and Pete Vermeer in the CSE Dean's Office for giving me this opportunity. I also wanted to thank Dr. Becker for his guidance and support during the semester in this struggle. And I definitely want to thank Dr. Tracy Galarowitz. She's a professor and department chair for biology and my supervisor. She's always continued to support me throughout everything, especially my personal goal of obtaining this degree. So thank you, everybody, for giving me this opportunity.